Like most things in the body, iron is a bit of a double-edged sword. Too little iron could simply just make you feel tired and unenergetic, but too much iron could actually be kind of dangerous and is one of the causes of aging. So iron is actually a part of our red blood cells, and our red blood cells will bring oxygen around the entire body. And oxygen is required for any sort of energy production. So having low iron is often correlated with symptoms of low energy. And iron can also be used in specific enzymes that are required for many bodily functions. However, once we have all of these iron stores saturated, iron simply just accumulates inside the body, specifically in the liver. Having low iron means we don't have enough iron for its important functions. Having normal iron simply means we have enough for the important functions, but not too much left over. But when we have high iron, we'll have a little bit of excess, meaning we'll have a little bit of iron accumulation. And what happens when we have iron accumulation? Iron is actually extremely reactive and can go through what's called the Fenton reaction. And this is where iron reacts with a molecule called hydrogen peroxide that's made inside of our body and produces what's called a hydroxyl radical. And the big thing to know about hydroxyl radicals is they have one less electron than they want. The best way to understand all of this is through a simple chemistry class. But in essence, all molecules want a specific number of electrons, and all molecules inside the body contain electrons. When they have the correct amount, they're considered stable, but when they have too many or not enough, they're considered unstable and reactive. And a hydroxyl radical is unstable. And simply what it does is it goes around the cells and different body tissues and will steal electrons from stable molecules, making itself stable but other molecules unstable. And then that unstable molecule will then either react with a new molecule or simply just be left damaged. And this continues until it's subsequently neutralized by things like antioxidants. And some of the important things damaged by this hydroxyl radical are the membranes of our cells, different proteins inside of our cells that are actually part of signaling for neurotransmitters and hormones. For example, excess iron could be linked to something called insulin resistance because the insulin signaling proteins are damaged by this hydroxyl radical. And the other thing that could happen is this hydroxyl radical could actually damage our DNA. And the more DNA damage that occurs, the more at risk we are for things like cancer. And I am in no way saying that having high iron or eating iron is going to give you any of these issues or cause cancer. But the more excess iron that you accumulate, and the longer you're exposed to it, simply the more you are exposed to some of this damage. And this is going to be in a population of people who are supplementing with iron even though they have normal or even high iron stores. And the other population is someone with the hemochromatosis gene. The hemochromatosis gene actually causes individuals to absorb iron much more rapidly than other people. And the mechanisms that most people have in place to regulate iron absorption are a little bit less functional. See, there are proteins inside of our intestinal tract that will absorb iron when we need iron for things like hemoglobin, but will reduce iron absorption when we no longer need more iron. But someone who has hemochromatosis or a similar genetic alteration doesn't have this regulatory system in place, therefore they just continue to absorb more and more iron. Therefore their storage forms of iron begin to accumulate, and this is where they get into the dangers of having high iron. Interestingly, this genetic alteration was thought to have developed in places that didn't have a lot of iron abundance in their food supply. Specifically in iron during what's called the potato famine, meaning that a lot of individuals of Irish heritage may have this hemochromatosis gene, and they're more at risk of iron overload. So the first thing to do to know if you need more or less iron is to simply get an iron blood panel. And there are many different lab markers, so it's quite complex, and it's best to actually work with a professional. Specifically, one of the important markers is ferritin, because this is a marker of your stored iron, the iron not being used in red blood cells. If it's too low, you would likely benefit of increasing iron consumption. Specifically, my recommendation is from food, which I'll get to in a moment. And if it's too high, there are a few things you can do. If it's extremely high, such in the case of someone with hemochromatosis, they'll actually resort to what's called therapeutic phlebotomy. And this is actually donating blood, which will reduce the amount of red blood cells we have transiently, and then we'll use this stored iron for the creation of new red blood cells, therefore taking iron out of storage and using it for its functional roles. But this could be dangerous because you're not just losing iron, you're losing a lot of other vital micronutrients. So you'd want to make sure that you're already in a healthy state in terms of micro and macronutrient status before undergoing blood donation or phlebotomy. Now we lose a very, very small amount of iron every single day. Menstruating women will lose the most amount of iron, but non-menstruating women and men lose a very small amount of iron. So menstruating women are more at risk of iron deficiency, and men and non-menstruating women may be more at risk of iron overload. But again, you would want to get a blood test before making any sort of conclusion. So let's take a scenario where we're low on iron. How can we go about this dietarily to increase iron? The first thing we can do is actually take vitamin C supplementation or eat vitamin C rich foods alongside iron rich foods. And this is because vitamin C will actually increase the uptake of iron. So drizzling a little bit of lemon on your steak could actually help increase your iron absorption. And we look at the opposite spectrum. If you have high iron, potentially trying to avoid any sort of vitamin C supplementation or vitamin C rich food alongside an iron rich food. Therefore, you can kind of still eat any food that you enjoy that contains iron, but won't have this hyperabsorption caused by vitamin C. There are also 3 micronutrients that seem to actually reduce iron absorption, specifically calcium, zinc, and copper. Zinc and copper actually use the same transporter as iron, so they kind of compete with iron, meaning it's much more likely that this iron will pass through our digestive system and not be absorbed. Great places for zinc and copper are going to be liver and oysters, and these foods also contain iron. So my best recommendation would be to add these foods in and simply just see how this alters your iron status. And if you have low iron, actually trying to avoid zinc and copper supplementation alongside any sort of iron-rich meal or supplement. And the last thing I'll mention, while there's tons of other things that I would love to share if you have any questions, is actually a compound called phytates. And phytates is what's referred to as an anti-nutrient because it will actually inhibit the absorption of iron and other micronutrients like zinc. And these are going to be found most abundant in whole grains, beans, nuts, and legumes. So if you're low on iron or taking an iron supplement, you would probably want to avoid phytates. And if you're high on iron, technically you could use phytates alongside an iron-rich meal to reduce absorption. But remember, this is also going to come at the expense of zinc. With that being said, if you have any questions, leave them in the comments or message me. And I hope you found this interesting.